Hello, BMCC. My name is Farhan Ahmad, and I am here with my partner in forensic crime, Kalia Hyland. And today we will take you into the world of forensic science. To be a forensic scientist, one has to develop a strong foundation during their academics. Science is used to find answers and provide closure for families seeking them. So today, with the help of our special guest, we will discuss how to get there and one of the many ways the job is done. So without further interruption, we present to you Bugs and Drugs. All right, hello everybody. Welcome to our podcast. My name is Farhan Ahmad. I'm a forensic science major at BMCC, and this is my partner.
Hi everyone, my name is Kalia Hyland. My major is forensic science at BMCC. Yeah, that's it. This is my partner, Burhan. Nice to meet you, Dr. Rosati.
Nice to meet you both.
Yeah, so we're very fortunate today to have our special guest, Dr. Jennifer Rosati. She is a professor at John Jay University, and she specializes in entomology forensics, which is pretty fascinating. It's bugs, if I am correct. And we just look forward to hearing about it. And hopefully we could educate students who are interested in this field about how to go about and becoming a forensic scientist and what exactly goes into it. So we look forward to learning what we can from you. To start off, why don't you tell us a little about yourself, Doctor?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Jennifer Rosati. I am an assistant professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and I am also a forensic entomologist. So part of my position is teaching students in the forensic science program, advising students. I'm also the major coordinator, and then I also do research in the field of forensic entomology.
Wonderful. Sounds great. How did you become a forensic scientist?
So I actually didn't think I was ever going to become a forensic scientist. I started off with my undergraduate degree in wildlife biology. I was interested in veterinary college at the time in my undergraduate career and in being a wildlife vet. So I took my degree in wildlife biology, and lo and behold, some of my first elective that I took in entomology, I had an amazing professor, and he just kind of sparked something in me about insects. So originally I was actually afraid of insects, believe it or not. I was terrified of them, like most people are. Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
Well, that was going to be one of my next questions. Like, were you always interested in like bugs? And because I'm terrified of bugs, so
yeah, absolutely not. I was terrified. I grew up scared of bugs. Fish flies, for instance, we get them in our area, and it's kind of the thing for kids to do in grade school. The boys will chase you around with the fish flies and try to put them in your hair. So I was terrified, absolutely terrified. Yeah. But then during that course, I learned that they don't even have functional mouth parts. They're no threat to you. They're only alive for, a very short period of time, like a 48-hour window. They basically spend most of their time in the water. They just come out to mate, and then they go back to the water to try and lay their eggs to continue spreading their genes. And I thought that was fascinating, something that I was terrified of my whole entire life. I had no reason to be scared of. And learning about that is kind of what sparked my interest. And I kind of thought, I was driven by fear for all of these years, but they're actually pretty amazing. And then learning about how insects have their role in the environment, and that was just something that really interested me. So I just kept taking entomology electives. I had amazing professors in the program. One of them ended up being my PhD committee member and research mentor as well. So it just kind of fell in my lap taking entomology courses, and then I ended up having a daughter shortly after I finished my degree, and I worked for a bit, and I went back home and I took courses part-time. And then when I was ready, I thought, I really want to get back into education, and I was taking kind of prerequisites to gear me up for veterinary college again. And then I just had an opportunity for graduate school, and that kind of just took over from there. When I went to speak to my PhD advisor, I had the entomology background that she was looking for, and it just kind of took off from there. So it was not something that I really geared myself up for, even thought I would be doing. Aside from, I knew I liked academics, I knew I wanted a PhD, and I knew I wanted to keep up with my science and math, and then it just kind of fell into my lap. So, and it's funny because I always consider, you know, what if I went the vet school route, and I very likely would have been doing medical entomology, which is another branch of veterinary medicine, which is very similar and has a lot of overlap with forensic entomology. So I probably would have been doing something very similar, if not the same thing, just a different pathway.
Wow, that's really, really cool. I'm sure you have a lot of interesting stories, and I'm sure people love to hear, you know, your experiences and what you've seen, because most people, like myself, are afraid of bugs. I mean, you know, I have a love-hate relationship. I probably don't have a strong stomach as you do. But now, two words, bugs and drugs, right? Is that something that you specialize in? How do they go hand in hand with each other, if you don't mind explaining us?
Sure. So bugs and drugs go hand in hand. We call that entomotoxicology. And so typically, insects become very important in an investigation. One of the most common uses is to come up with a colonization interval, or try to determine your postmortem interval, or time since death is the most renowned use of insects. But insects consume tissue as it's decomposing. The insects that we work with need to consume dead decomposing tissue in order to complete their life cycle. So this makes them very specific for that. And insects, what they do is they bioaccumulate, which means they're really a reflection of what they're eating. And so if they're feeding on decomposing tissue, and let's say it's from a person that's unfortunately deceased, if that person consumed drugs prior to, or was a consistent drug user, and by drugs I don't necessarily mean overdose drugs like heroin and things like that. They could be regularly consuming benzodiazepines and methamphetamines and different types of even medication drugs. But if they have it in their system and the insects are feeding off of them, the larvae will have that chemical signature in them as well, and in their tissues. And so they really are a reflection of what they eat. And so instead of running tissue for toxicological analysis, you can actually run the insects, either larvae, even when the insects are done. So the insects will feed during the larval stage, and then they wander away, call it wandering. They search for a place to pupate. And then they usually pupate in the surrounding soil. And then when they emerge out as an adult, they leave their pupal case behind, much like a butterfly the life cycle of a butterfly, right? They'll leave their cocoon behind. Flies do the same thing. So they leave their pupa behind, and that will also pick up some drugs as well, because they actually have the ability to purge out some toxins during metamorphosis when they're undergoing pupation. So you can use the larvae, you can use pupal casings that are left behind, and they could be analyzed years after the person's been dead and gone. Yeah.
That's incredible.
So they can actually become extremely, extremely important in an investigation. The only problem is that it's an emerging field. So we really need to kind of do some more research studies as far as, you know, what are the signature values? What are we picking up? Are we picking up drug compounds, different metabolites? How does it affect their development? So all those are areas of research within the field of entomotoxicology. But yeah, insects can be extremely, extremely important. There's been many times where the tissue is no longer viable for running an analysis on, and really the only thing you may have are the pupal casings left behind, or whatever the insects are leaving behind.
So if not, so in some cases, if not most of them, bugs can be used to like tell the time of death. I don't know where I saw it, but I think I saw this in like, you know, those popular shows where the bugs can be used to tell like how long this person has been dead based on the type of like bugs or like what's there.
Yep. Yeah. We use their development. So what's important about insects is they can't regulate their body temperature. They're subject to the temperatures around them. And so as long as we know what species we're dealing with and we know the ambient temperature that they've been developing on, you can work backwards by looking at their developmental stages to figure out when the colonization occurred. And that's when the flies actually come in and lay their eggs. And I call my flies, they're like terrestrial sharks. So remember what I said before, these insects they've evolved to rely on decomposing animal tissue to complete their development. That means they are highly evolved to find it. So if there's something that drops dead in the middle of a forest, these flies are going to hone in on that, much like
Amazing.
a shark can detect a drop of blood in the ocean.
Yeah.
These flies will do the same. When a body dies, it immediately starts releasing volatile or chemical compounds. It's like the smell of death that they can detect.
Is that the
So
same
they,
as pheromones?
pardon?
Is that the same as pheromones?
Yes, it's just like pheromones, except pheromones are primarily released and used for mating, but it's the same concept. It's some sort of chemical signature that these insects can pick up on. So they'll start flying around, and most of these are flying around in the environment already. You're going to have females that are flying around in the environment, and most of them are going to be gravid, which means they're going to be ready to lay their eggs. They just need somewhere to lay them. So they'll start flying, and they'll locate the resource. And flies will colonize in typical situations, especially in outdoor settings. Flies will colonize sometimes within the first hour of death, sometimes within the first 24 to 48 hours. So they're very efficient at locating something that's dead, and they're very quick at laying their eggs. And they really have a kind of one-shot deal to lay their eggs before the adults are usually dying shortly after that. So they'll hone in, they'll locate the resource, they'll spend a little time kind of making sure it's a good spot to lay their eggs, and then lo and behold, you get many flies, female flies, that are laying their eggs at the same time. So because you have a close association from the time of death to the time of colonization, that's why we can look at their development after the egg is laid, and that will help line up what the postmortem interval or time since death is.
Wow. And are there any challenges in trying to, in using bugs to get questions answered? Could anything compromise your scientific study?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest problems we have is that people don't realize how important insects can be to an investigation until well after the fact. There's been many times where myself and my colleagues, our fellow forensic entomologists, are pulled in at the last minute or years after the fact to say, hey, what can you do? What can you tell us? When did this person die? And they give us a couple photographs. And so it's difficult to be able to do what we do well when we're in that type of scenario. There's only so much that we can provide as far as information is concerned. So ideally, it would be very helpful that when a body is discovered, if there's insects present, that the insects are sampled right away and sampled properly. And that's usually by a trained forensic entomologist or by someone on, say, the CSI team that is trained to collect insect evidence. Because the biggest thing is you want to preserve them as soon as possible when that body's discovered. That allows us to make the most precise estimate that we can.
Wow, okay.
Once you start moving the body, you're disturbing the insect evidence. Once you transport the body, now you're you're adding in different temperatures, different conditions. That makes our job more difficult. Once you get to the medical examiner's office, once you stick that in the fridge, our job becomes more difficult. So all of those things can compromise the colonization estimates that we can calculate. So it's really important to preserve things properly and as soon as possible, and then and document things properly too. Great photographs, photographs with scales, because I think a lot of people don't realize what they can provide until too late, and they don't know what to do with it when it's there. because there aren't that many people that know what to do with the insects, and a lot of times too they're washed away, so they get in the way of medical examiners oftentimes, right? They're consuming your tissue, they're consuming your evidence, they want to get rid of them right away so that they can preserve the body that's there and the tissue that's there. And so it kind of is a bit of, we can all contribute to an investigation together. So it's important to consider them evidence as well. So that way they're preserved in the proper way.
So this is probably the reason why it's still new and it's not as admissible in court because of all these, it could be compromised so easily. Is that why it's so challenging to establish this?
It is still challenging, yeah, because I mean, when you think forensic entomology has been around, I mean, for thousands of years, but it's really only taken hold in North America. I'd say, I mean, Payne did our first forensic entomology studies, kind of the father of our field, in the 1960s. So our field is kind of emerging over the last 50 years. And so it's kind of, we're a bit behind the other sciences. We're also trying to raise our standards as well, so that way we do get recognized as a true forensic science. It's funny, when you're a forensic entomologist, it's kind of like true hardcore ecologists and entomologists kind of look at you like, well, I mean, I don't know what you do, but I don't think it's a true ecological science. And then the people in the forensics kind of do the same thing. So it's like we're trying to figure out where we fit in all of the fields, but we're also trying to raise our standards as well, because I mean, it's evidence and it's considered so. And so and we've made a lot of progress in the last 10 to 20 years. But yeah, it's an emerging field. It's exciting to be in. A lot of questions that are unanswered. So there's a lot of opportunity for research, and a lot of attention's been brought to it because of all the shows.
Yeah. On the next point, that's one of my things too, because that's the reason why I even went into forensic science, is because of these shows. NCIS. My inspiration came from Abby on NCIS.
Yep.
And I don't remember the pathologist. I don't remember his name. I keep researching it and then I forget it after a while. But I wanted to go into toxicology or forensic pathology just because of those. So yeah.
Yeah, we get a lot of people. I mean, in our forensic science program too, there's a lot of people that that see all these shows and they want to do that as well. And then when they actually see, wait, it's forensic science, I need science behind me, and it's kind of comes to a shock to some people. But it's a lot of education that you need behind you to be able to be a forensic scientist.
Yeah. What misconceptions do people usually have? Like they'll compare the TV show. I saw this on TV, but in reality, I'm sure your friends or colleagues approach you and say, hey, I saw this on TV, but you're like, no, that's really not how it works. What are the common misconceptions that people have?
Common misconception is that you get to be on the scene. And that's really not how investigations are done. So most evidence is collected by trained police personnel, or they may be collected by, once again, trained people at a medical examiner's office. And so there's many times where even if I'm involved in a case that I'm getting samples taken after the fact, I don't get to go to the scene. I may ask to go to the scene afterwards to put temperature loggers down, because that's kind of part of our methodology. But for the most part, it's many people that are criminalists, for instance, and go through and get their degree, and are forensic scientists. They're working behind the scenes. You're working at a lab, you're working at a microscope. You analyze your evidence, you write your report, and that's your role. So you're not really on the scene. You may be called to testify, but there's kind of, you have your role in the part of the investigation, and everything kind of comes together as a whole with everybody's role. And so another misconception is that people think that they're like a jack of all trades, where they, you see in CSI, they're collecting the evidence, they're also questioning people and questioning suspects, and then they're arresting people, and that just doesn't happen either. if you're part of the CSI unit, you're processing the scene. You have investigators that'll be doing the questioning. You have criminalists that will be doing the analyzing. And like I said, all of that, everyone has their own individual role. And the other thing too is you have to be specialized in your role. So for me, I'm a forensic entomologist. I don't know what to do with bones, for instance. Like that's not my specialty.
Yeah.
You'd have to ask my colleague. We have a forensic anthropologist on campus as well. Like you would have to ask her what her, if she were to consult on those types of cases, because that's not what my specialty is. I can't address those questions, and you typically get that they want you to do this and this, and it's just that's not my area of expertise.
And now, have you had any high profile cases that you can discuss with us, or anything that we would be aware of that you worked on?
I did, but I can't comment on,
okay, that's
on those.
Totally fine. No problem at all. Okay.
Yeah, there's been a couple in the New York region. I'm originally from Canada, so I did work on a few cases back in Ontario.
Okay. Well, since Kaylee and I are both CUNY students, I believe we're going to be coming to John Jay University soon to continue our studies. And we both want to go on different tracks. I wanted to go into arson investigation. Now, what solid foundation can we build that no matter where we want to go, what do you recommend we do, regardless of the branch we want to follow?
It's got to be your science and math, and that is the core of any forensic science. What you do with it afterwards kind of will depend on how you tailor your degree to meet that. So one of the ways in which, if you want to be, say, specialized in fire investigations, for instance, when you get to, say, your fourth year, you would want to implement your project with that type of application, or keeping that in mind. So one of the unique opportunities that you have usually in your fourth year is doing a research internship, where you are involved in some sort of research project that will benefit the field. And if that's what you want to get into, it's a perfect opportunity to incorporate that into your project, because that starts giving you experience. The same thing if you were to proceed to get a master's degree, because to be a specialist in many of the forensic sciences, you need a higher level of education than just an undergraduate degree. And that's another thing. You would want to take a look at, what do you want to do? What kind of application do you want to have? And where do you want your role in the field to be? And then you would try to reach out to, say, someone that does research in that area, and ask if they would either be your supervisor if they have opportunities for graduate students, or you would ask them to be a committee member. So that's another thing that people don't realize. If you really want to do something and have expertise in the field, you can get there by having the appropriate people on your committee. So even though if you're doing, say, fire investigations and arson, you may have an arson specialist as your mentor, but they maybe not work necessarily in the forensic line that you want. So then you would reach out to somebody to have them on your committee. And so together they shape your project and they shape you as a student. And then that will help you become a specialist in that field as well, whether it's master's or whether it's PhD. So there's many different kind of opportunities to get into what you want to. There's many different ways to get there, but the core of all of it is going to come down to those science and math courses.
Well, that's wonderful information. Thank you. Thanks for clearing that up for us.
Yep.
Kayla, you had a question too. What was that?
So I've heard it's like so many times, like what we learn in like science, like for example, like learning about molarity and just all those like calculations and stuff like that. I heard it's like it's not the same. Like we don't do half of those. We don't use half of those things like in the real life, in the real world. So how much of it do we really use when it comes to forensics? Because I know forensics, I think mostly, I would think in forensics you would use most of what we learn in, like, especially chemistry, like the calculations and stuff like that.
See, that depends. If you're going into toxicology, If you're going into forensic chemistry, by all means, you're going to be using those calculations all the time. You're going to have a notebook where you're going to have to do chemical calculations and balance equations, and all of those
Oh,
fundamental chemical concepts that you're learning, you will be doing every day. Um, but there's other aspects that you might not use, but you really don't know until you are at the end point, right? And so you really need to understand all of the core concepts in those courses, unfortunately. And I give the example too, like I teach, right? And so I thought that all of those particular concepts I would never have to use again. And I don't necessarily have to use them to be a forensic entomologist. I don't really balance that many equations, but in teaching I do. And so you never know when those fundamental concepts are actually going to apply. So you're better off just learning it all and then filtering it out, because you never know what you're going to need.
Yeah.
okay, wonderful. I also wanted to ask you, you've been teaching at John Jay now for how long?
For 6 years.
6 years, correct. And have you seen the interest in this program, in this field, get more popular as time has gone on in your time there?
I'd say it's kind of steadied out. It's been pretty consistent. The interest in the forensic science program. I mean, I'm more aware of it just because I've become an advisor and major coordinator, that I think I'm more aware of the student interest as far as people transferring over, people trying to be admitted. But I'd say the overall interest in it has stayed pretty popular over the last few years. I haven't seen it decrease at all. If anything, it may have increased a bit. But like I said, I think more people know now the science. They're starting to get a better idea of the science involved in it. So I think that we're getting better students that are better prepared
Yeah.
Okay.
for their career, which is nice to see.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. When I signed up for this, I really did not think it was going to be this. I mean, not that I was going to say it was supposed to be easy, but it is a lot of work, and it was a lot of math and a lot of science. And I think it's very important for schools to let students know, hey, this is a commitment. Get ready. This is not exactly what you see on TV. This is not just going to a crime scene and solving it right there. This is a lot of work, life work that goes into it. And I think the schools have definitely gotten better in letting that, be known to the students and misleading them. And it was a surprise to me, but I'm all in. I'm all for it,
Good.
and I love it, and I'm very excited to continue moving forward with it. And the professors do a great job, of course, and I'm definitely excited to come to John Jay and continue studying.
Yeah, I mean, that's all we can ask from students is being prepared for the workload, the course load, the subjects, being prepared mentally to be able to, pursue this full steam ahead, and be well prepared to know that. And well prepared means, unfortunately, we're looking for all of that science and math in high school. So if you haven't taken it in high school, that's going to limit your competitiveness when it comes time to apply for the program. But I mean, I always say that with a grain of salt, because I always tell students too, if this is something that you're truly passionate about, this is something that you really, really want to do, and you don't have the background to do it, get it. There's ways to get it, right? And go take those courses, do well. We want to see you excel in these subjects. And and if you excel, then by all means, like, let's continue this further. So, but I mean, we have the job of educating forensic scientists, and given the application and the sensitivity of the nature of the field, and what you end up doing, working with evidence and presenting evidence, and you have other people's lives in your hands. Like, we
Yeah,
need to make sure that you have a solid education. We can't compromise the education, because a lot of people want to come in and don't understand how much science is involved. So, I mean, we have to keep our standards up in educating students, because that's how we contribute to the field, and we make sure that we're educating quality forensic scientists coming out from here. And that's what we consider our job as a college and as an institution.
wonderful. And aside from obviously all the science and the math, how about law, studying law and knowing how the laws work of wherever you are? Is that an asset to your education as well?
It is definitely an asset. So we actually have students take Law 202 to get their
Oh, wow.
kind of base information on how the legal system works. So for me, I didn't have a legal background because I'm so specialized in a specific area. I usually get called in as an expert witness, and I'm specialized in kind of doing what I do as an entomologist. But I still need to know the legal context of that. I'm involved in the chain of custody. I'm handling evidence myself, so I need to maintain high standards of integrity for the evidence, sorry, that is coming through my lab and that I'm working with. And so knowing my role, I do have to know some of the legal context. Sometimes I'm involved in executing search warrants, and so I
Wow,
need to
really?
understand what my role is in that. When I'm subpoenaed, when I have to go through and be qualified as an expert witness. So all of those legal aspects are involved in my job as well. And so so I didn't take any courses in that, which means I have to do more background myself in understanding what my role is and being prepared for that. So even though I don't have a course to take, I still need to read up and still be educated in the legal aspects of my profession as well.
So you say in forensic entomology you have to be specialized, right? So I tend to not like to do specialized things because I tend to get like disinterested really quickly. So I have to be doing like different things every day. Well, not every day, but it's like a mixer of it every day. So would you say like your day is the same every day, or is like what's like a typical day for you?
So that's when most forensic entomologists, we do the consulting on the side. And so there's only a few full-time forensic entomologists that are employed. So one of my colleagues is in the, I think, Houston Medical Examiner's office, and where she just does cases. But she also does research as well. So typically, I'm a teacher is what I do. So, and I'm an assistant professor. So my typical day is actually, well, I mean, nowadays, what is typical? But my typical day would be going to work, teaching my courses, following up with students, and then maybe I have a lab as well where research is done. So I usually go down to the lab, check on my graduate students and undergraduate research students. And then that's kind of what takes up the bulk of my time is being a teacher and being a researcher. And then when the casework comes in, and then I focus on the casework. And so there's kind of a balance between all of those aspects in my role as a forensic entomologist. And I like it because I like teaching, I like educating students, and then I also like doing the casework as well, applying my specialty in a way that can help an investigation. So that kind of it's a well-rounded, and I mean, you know, going along the lines of what you were saying, when you're in a position and you're doing, you know, your job, there's still different aspects to do. You're not always doing the same thing over and over again. It's not as if you're working on a manufacturing line, for instance, where you're just doing the same thing over and over again. So there's going to be many different aspects that you can get involved with that kind of give you that diversity that you're looking for.
Dr. Rosati, carrion insects. We know that the maggots, flies are one of them. What are the other carrion insects that we wouldn't know about?
So there's so many different types of insects that we work with. So when we're considering what we do for colonization estimates or time of death, one of the primary groups that we're working with are the blowflies, and those are the shiny metallic flies that you'll see. So usually if anybody I tell everybody, if you have a dog, you go outside, your dog does his business on the street, make sure you're picking it up right away. If you don't and you watch it for a bit, you're going to see some flies come in. And so all those shiny flies, those would be your blowflies.
Amazing. I always wondered what those were. Thank you.
Yeah, the shiny metallic ones. So sometimes they're big and blue and shiny. The most common ones are the green bottle flies that you'll see. Those are shiny and obviously green. And then we have some black bottles and different types of screwworm flies. But primarily that's what we work with are the blowflies and their larvae, which would be the maggots. We also work with house flies. We also work with flesh flies. Those are involved in the one methodology that we use is just looking at fly or maggot development. So those are the three main groups of flies that we will work with. But when we take a look at the second method that we use, this is more for longer decomposition timelines. So once the blowflies are done their development, it kind of opens up the door for all kinds of different types of insects. So we deal with many different types of beetles. There's carrion beetles, there's staph beetles or rove beetles.
Wow.
There's dermestid beetles. So some of those are pests usually feeding on textiles and fabrics, but there's a few species that feed on decomposing animal tissue. They like to feed on dried skin tissue. And so we deal with them and their larvae. We deal with, there's a clothes moth, Tanaid moth, that will lay its eggs on decomposition soaked clothing. And then the larvae will develop off of that, and they'll feed on the clothing, but I've also seen them feed on some mites that are there as well. So we also work with mites. We also work with ants. Ants will come in and they'll strip a body clean when the blowflies are laying their eggs. So there's a couple cases where the blowfly colonization or egg laying is actually delayed for a few days because the ant population is so high, it just keeps taking the eggs as they lay them. And so that will come into play with our estimate, because now we have a time of death, but our colonization is 3 to 4 days later. What happened in here? And it's because of the ants. Yeah, we work with parasitoid wasps. So there's different types of wasps that will come in and they will lay their eggs in the beetle larvae or fly larvae, or as well as the pupa that are there. And so instead of flies coming out, we'll get a whole bunch of parasitoid wasps coming out instead. And like I said, they have a developmental cycle too. And so we take a look at the developmental cycles of all those different types of insects when we have a longer decomposition. And we also look at what we call them arrival patterns. And so as a body decomposes, it will attract different types of insects. And that's what we see. We see successional waves. So we'll see blowflies come in within the first day or two. We'll see beetles come in after that. Most of those are going to be feeding on the larvae. So it makes sense that they come afterwards because they want to make sure the maggots are there. So they'll be feeding on the maggots and they'll be completing their development. And then once the maggots kind of hit the wandering stage, you'll start to get the parasitoid wasps come in because that's what they're looking for. And so we really kind of take a look at so many different types of insects. And also keep in mind that a forensic entomologist, they might not be doing a colonization estimate. So there's been some instances where you may need to tie a suspect to a crime. And there might be insect evidence that can assist in that, because there's been a few cases where insect fragments or specialized insects will be found on the clothing of a suspect as well as a victim. And the insects in that case actually serve to provide that link between the victim and the suspect and potentially the scene of the crime. So, and in drug trafficking as well, to help isolate where packages are coming from. Insects may be coming with the packages and with the drugs, or they might be caught in the packaging tape at their point of origin, and then they come in, and then, you know, it can be used to aid in an investigation in that way. So there's many, many different ways that insects can become important. So we're not just limited, like we specialize in what our kind of baby insects are, like our you know, specialized insects, the ones that we deal with on a regular basis, but we're not limited to that. So it's really good as an entomologist if you kind of have a good basis in other insect groups as well.
Of course, you know, it's just people see insects, they just, you know, instantly it's considered to be a pest or gross, and they don't realize how important they are to our biological system, how they can help us out. And this is all great information. And I hope people get educated a little bit more on how useful they are. They're not just bugs.
They're not just bugs.
They do
make
a
the
lot.
world go round.
They make the world go round.
Yep.
Even decomposing a body in waves.
It's important. I mean,
teamwork. That's incredible.
Think about what would happen if we didn't have the flies and the maggots that are breaking this down.
Yeah.
You would have bodies that are sitting there for an extended period of time. You would get increase in disease and an increase in various types of bacteria. And it just, I mean, everyone has their role in the environment, and the maggots are no different. So they are really important.
Absolutely.
Overlooked, but important.
Of
This
course.
might be a funny question, but I always wonder, like, what is the purpose of mosquitoes? Mosquitoes, like, what's the purpose?
Yeah.
Mosquitoes? What do they serve? What purpose do they serve?
As someone that seems to be overly I attract mosquitoes to a higher percentage than other people for some reason. But you know what? Insects like that, they still have their role. So the insect larval stage is aquatic. And so that's why they say eliminate outstanding waters, so they'll control your mosquito populations. But in standing aquatic waters, there's a lot of other insects that will come in and eat the larvae. And so they are actually form the basis of many aquatic food webs. And so if you didn't have them there, all of the other types of insects and other types of fish that rely on that would suffer. And so mosquitoes do have their role in the environment. It's unfortunate that some of them carry diseases that can be potentially deadly. So in that instance, you want to kind of target your control approach to just control the spread of the disease in those particular species of mosquitoes. And I know sometimes they'll just go in and blanket like fog areas, and you're killing a lot of beneficial insects when something like that happens. So
Yeah, I'm from the Caribbean, so that's why I'm like, mosquitoes. Why?
yeah, they do. They're very important in aquatic systems. And also, I mean, the adults are important as well in terrestrial systems because they provide a food source for many birds and other types of insects as well. So they are unfortunately important.
Everyone has a place.
A pest, but they are, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Mazzotti, I have to thank you so much. This is so informative and incredibly helpful, and a lot of fun to learn about, bugs, because we're not taught about bugs. We should be taught about bugs more in school I feel earlier, like elementary school. They should be teaching us a lot more about bugs to change our perceptions and people's perceptions, and the importance of the work you do. Also, thank you for everything you do, and thank you for teaching us about them. And
yes, my pleasure.
I appreciate your time today. Kayla, do you have anything to say?
Well, hopefully I get to see you in John Jay, because I might be knocking on your door.
I can't wait to be back in my office so that students like you can knock on my door. So my door is usually open for the most part. So yeah, it'd be great to see you both on campus.
Likewise, looking forward to that day. And once again, thank you, Dr. Mazzotti, for being our guest today. And we hope to see you around.
Yes, me too.
Okay.
Ready?
Okay. Have a good day. Thank you.
Yep. Stay safe.
You too. Goodbye.
Bye.